All right, well, I guess good morning and welcome to the first webinar of the Pork Chat series. My name is Jennifer and I work for the Maryland Pork Producers Association. I guess before we get started today with Dr. Galloway, I just have a few little updates from our organization. We are still accepting new members for the 2022 year. If you would like to find a form, you can find that on our website, www.marylandpork.org. Members receive quarterly newsletters, press releases, and access to events like this. Today's webinar was organized by the Maryland Pork Producers with funding provided by the Iowa Pork Producers. And lastly, just don't forget that these webinars will take place on the first Friday of each month at noon. We will be discussing different topics each month and they will be recorded so you can find them online afterwards. I think that's it. It's all yours, Dr. Galloway.
All right, well, thank you, Jennifer. I am Stuart Galloway. I'm Senior Swine Nutritionist with Hubbard Feeds. On my little picture there on the screen, it says Darlene. Apparently my wife's name is on the Zoom account, but I am Stuart. I also want to give credit to the other members of our team. Dr. Enrique Samin helped me a lot with these slides. We do a lecture like this with some other universities, and we co-teach that. And so several of the slides are his, and then the entire Hubbard Swine Team for putting this together. We're going to talk about swine nutrition concepts and applications today. So about the first 2/3 will be concepts, and then the last part will be some applications. When we think about swine nutrition, the best way to look at this is really to look at this pyramid. And energy is at the bottom. Energy, if you think about a pyramid, the base is the most important part. Everything else is built on it. So when we think about swine nutrition, everything is built on the energy. Above that, we look at protein and particularly amino acids, then macro minerals, calcium, phosphorus, and we'll talk about salt as well, then vitamins and trace minerals, and then feed additives. And you'll notice dollar signs on the left, economic impact. Energy is the most expensive ingredient, and we work our way up through the pyramid. So on the right, it talks about time investment. We're going to spend more time on the energy and the protein and the amino acids when we formulate diets because of that importance. Let's talk about energy. Just a definition there. Energy is a product of oxidation of organic compounds in feed. Very, very simple definition. Also, if you remember back from science class in high school, energy can be not formed. It cannot be created or destroyed. It can just change form. So when we think about feed energy going into a pig, it's either retained in that body for growth, milk, reproduction, or it's excreted in the feces, the urine, or as body heat. And as I said earlier with the pyramid, it is the single most expensive nutrient in the swine diet. What are our sources of energy? Well, in the US, it's going to be primarily corn, then the other grain, wheat, maybe some distillers, some oats, and then of course the fats and oils, which are much more concentrated sources of energy. As we move to the north or to the south, we may get into small grains, we may get into the sorghum or milo. And as we move around the world, we're looking at other grains like rice and a whole variety of other animal and plant products. Remember, energy consumed is going to be either retained or it's going to be excreted. When we think about the energy systems that we use to define how we're going to formulate our diets, gross energy is simply the amount of energy in the feed that you feed. There's a process called bomb calorimetry where you burn a small sample of that feed, you measure how much energy is released, and you get the gross energy. When we feed that feed, then some of that is excreted out in the feces, and what's left, we call that digestible energy. The next step of what's digested and absorbed, some of that is excreted in the urine. So now we have metabolizable energy. And then finally, when we account for what is actually used by the pig for body heat, we have net energy. We're formulating on a net energy basis today because that defines best what that pig actually has available for use. Let's shift and talk about the next layer up in that pyramid, proteins and amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks for proteins in the body, for muscle. We want to talk specifically about amino acids. I know a lot of people still talk about protein, and maybe in other species, yes. In pigs, we want to move away from talking about protein and talking about amino acids, because that's what's actually used. So a pig eats a protein, and it's made up of amino acids, and they're in a chain. So think about, let's say, a log chain. And the body breaks that apart into every individual link in the gut. Then it's reformed back into proteins in different order of amino acids for use in that animal for growth and reproduction. There are 20 different amino acids that the pig uses. 10 of them they can produce themselves, 10 they cannot, that we have to provide in the diet, and those are called the 10 essential amino acids. Well, why is this important? Well, if an amino acid is not provided in the right amount, that becomes the limiting point of what that pig can do as far as protein synthesis. This barrel illustration has been around for a long time. It is still such a great illustration. So the barrel is holding the whatever we're going to be producing in that pig, the protein products. It takes a group of amino acids to produce that, and in the barrel, add to first, and then we add the others up beyond that to continue to improve our protein. Pigs have amino acid requirements, not protein requirements. We still may talk in terms of an 18 or a 16 or something like that for protein, but it's really talking in terms of amino acids. Through our research, we can determine exactly how much of each amino acid a pig needs. And this work has been going on for decades now. And we found that lysine is the first limiting amino acid. So when we're looking at defining a diet for a certain size or phase of pig, we determine what the amount of lysine is that's needed. And then all of the other amino acids are expressed as a ratio to lysine. So you'll hear about, the example here, THR is threonine. So the threonine to lysine ratio. And those ratios remain pretty constant in different phases of production for the pig. It really helps us in formulation because we set a lysine specification on the diet, and all the other ones are set as a ratio then to lysine. We get asked, is more better? Can I just keep adding more and more and more lysine? Well, no, that's not good. And same way with any of the amino acids. And there are two reasons for that. One is that there are amino acid imbalances, and that's just inefficient in the pig. We don't have them in the right amounts that the animal needs to make the proteins. The other thing is there are actually antagonisms between some amino acids and some other amino acids, and if we overdo one of those, it can have an antagonistic effect in that animal. What about when we go to diet formulas? In the past, we may look at just corn and soybean meal, and that would be this column on the left, the diet on the left. And then as we have more and more amino acids available to us, and then as we do the research on what those levels should be, we can now add up to 6 different amino acids into the diets of pigs. In finishing pigs, we typically add 4, and in starter pigs, we're now adding a 5th and 6th ones as well. So let's look at what the impact is here of doing that. If we just have our corn soy diet on the left, there's a diet cost, and it's fairly expensive. We've also got a lot of excess nitrogen and excess protein for that pig to get rid of. So think back to our barrel here on the right side. We are talking mostly about the short staves, but look at the long staves. That's extra protein that pig has to use up, excrete from the body, tear apart, use for other things. That's inefficient in that pig. If we come to our second column here, where we add some lysine into that diet, notice we're now using less soybean meal. Our diet cost goes down. We have less overage of protein for that pig to excrete. If we add 3 amino acids, we take out even more bean meal, lower the cost, make that pig more efficient, And finally, with the 4 amino acids in there that we have available today, we're cutting out well over a third of the soybean meal in that diet, really lowering our diet cost and our inefficiency for that pig, and trying to make that pig as efficient as possible to make the proteins that it needs to make. All right, let's shift up to the next level in that pyramid and talk about the macro minerals. We think about calcium and phosphorus are the primary macro minerals, and that's mostly the bone. 99% of the calcium and 80% of the phosphorus are in the skeleton of that pig. Those are also important, though, in lean tissue deposition. Phosphorus is important in all of the energy transformations in the body. So they're important beyond just bone, but we tend to think about them primarily in bone. And just like we talked about ratios with amino acids, balance and ratio is very important with calcium and phosphorus as well. And we call it a calcium to phosphorus ratio. And that ratio we like to have between about 1 to 1 and 1.3 to 1. If we go below 1 to 1, meaning we have less calcium than phosphorus in that diet, that's just inefficient for the pig long term. If we have a much higher calcium, let's say we get to 1.5, I've even seen diets as high as 2 to 1 calcium to phosphorus. And that's also inefficient, but that high calcium starts competing with some of the absorption of other trace minerals and can cause problems later on, with the metabolism of that pig. So we want to keep that ratio between about 1 to 1 and 1.3 to 1. What are our phosphorus sources in the diet? Because as I say down there, that is the third most expensive nutrient in a swine diet. But we can add inorganic phosphates. It used to be dicalcium phosphate. It's almost all monocalcium phosphate. It's an expense. It's not renewable. It has to be manufactured. And it's a hot topic in the world today. I mean, if you're doing crops as well, you know that what the cost of fertilizer phosphorus has done just in the last couple of months here. The same thing is happening in the feed phosphate side, feed phosphorus side, because it's a manufactured product. So it's becoming a much more expensive nutrient than it has been in the past. Unfortunately, for pigs, the phosphorus that's in grains is not available to the pig. It is bound in this circular structure here that's called phytate. And about 80% of the phosphorus in corn is bound in this form and not available for the pig to use. So what can we do about that? Well, through the development of phytase, which is an enzyme that now breaks apart this circular ring and releases the phosphorus, it makes that phosphorus available to the animal. And virtually every swine diet today has phytase in it. Everything we do with sows, starter pigs, grow finish, everything has phytase in it as an enzyme. Calculations before phosphorus started going up dramatically here, it is probably saving well over $1 a pig to use phytase in that finisher feed, because when you release the phosphorus in the grain, you can take out some of that expensive monocal from the diet. And so it can be a very nice cost savings. Last macro mineral, don't forget the salt. It is not very expensive, but it is extremely important. If we have a deficiency of salt, the pigs don't eat very well, and they may even start savaging. I've had a couple situations the last couple of years where something happened at the feed mill, the salt was not delivered into the diets, and even after just a few days, those pigs are chewing on each other. They're trying to find something that has salt in it. So it's very, very important. What about excess? Well, it kind of depends on the level. Pigs can tolerate relatively high levels of salt as long as they have plenty of water available. Salt can be a limiter for intake too. So we know if we get really high salt, they just simply won't eat it anymore. But a little bit higher levels, we're okay with that as long as they have plenty of water. Vitamins and trace minerals. Next little piece up that pyramid. What do we supplement when we talk about vitamins and trace minerals for pigs? 10 to 12 vitamins. Some of them are fat soluble, some of them are water soluble, and then 6 trace minerals are provided for that pig. they come in very low inclusion. Our vitamin addition is maybe a half a pound of them all together in the pig, in the diet, and then trace minerals are maybe a pound and a half for all of it. So really a small portion of that diet. Vitamins, trace minerals are involved in almost every enzyme system in the body, every metabolic process in the body. Whether we're talking about growth, we're talking about health, we're talking about reproduction, they are vital in all phases of production. I want to talk about two trace minerals specifically here because these are not in the ordinary package that we would use. Zinc and copper are sometimes fed at high levels for a short period of time for very specific reason. Zinc is usually in a diet at around 120 parts per million. But for the first 2 to 3 weeks after weaning in the nursery, we may run that up to 2,000 to 3,000 parts per million. It improves performance and it lowers the incidence of diarrhea, especially in the face of E. coli. We continue in our research to work on other gut health products, natural gut health products, to help us decrease the amount of zinc that we have to put into those pigs. But zinc is still a very effective addition. Copper, typically in the 10 part per million area. Early in the nursery, we may run that from 150 to 250 parts per million. And then in finishing pigs, maybe 100 to 150. It is an antimicrobial. It works very good for helping improve the condition of that gut and gives us a very nice response in gain in those pigs. So both of those are a little different than just a regular vitamin and trace mineral package, but can be very effective. All right, the top of that pyramid, feed additives. I've got a whole list of them here. What I would say about these is they almost all have a good function. They work. They will at least return your investment back. What we really like to do is position them specifically for a farm. So if you've got a specific situation at your farm, we'll talk through that with you. You know, maybe we need to put an acidifier in there, or maybe we need a mycotoxin binder. Maybe we need some other enzymes. It depends on the situation and what your production goals are, but these can be very effective, but we don't want to add them all in there, of course, but we can look at them specifically to help your situation. But like it says at the bottom of the screen there, make sure you cover everything else in the pyramid before we start heading down the feed additive road. All right, one final look at the pyramid before we talk about some of the specific diet phasing. Energy is at the bottom. It's the most expensive nutrient. It's where we're going to spend our time to get it right. Then the amino acids, macrominerals, work our way up to the vitamins and trace minerals, and finally look at prescribing some specific feed additives. Two more slides as we think about some of the basics before we talk about sows. Feed quality. Feed quality starts with good quality ingredients. I think we know that, but that's still important to think about. If you've got sows, if you've got nursery pigs, we want to use the best corn, save the best corn for them. We want to do a good job with weighing and mixing of ingredients. Particle size, this would be either the roller corn or the ground corn. We know that when we have a smaller particle size, a finer particle size, we get better digestibility. We also know that if we get that too fine, we start having problems with maybe flowability or handling or lactating sow feed intake. The pigs really, because, sorry about that, the recording light went off and on. So feed form, pellet versus crumble versus meal. It depends on the situation, but all of those can work well. Don't forget about mycotoxins. Don't overlook that. Every year, someplace has mycotoxin problems. We get out toward the eastern U.S., we tend to have more, and a lot of times because of wetter conditions at harvest time. We can help you with that, with testing for the toxins and also binders that can help address that. If you have any questions, any concerns about your feed, get a sample. We'll look at either a mycotoxin test or a nutrient test. And the last one here is water. It's often called the forgotten nutrient. I remember when I got out of grad school and started working in tech service, a couple of days after I started, my boss came in and sat down and he said, "We're going to talk about water." He said, "You're going to be asked to talk about feed, look at feed, what is thought to be a feed problem. Don't forget about the water." And that has helped a lot to remember that. Always look at the water. We want to be sure we have good quality water, and we want to be sure we have availability of enough water. And we'll talk about that a little bit with lactating sows. And in nursery pigs too, because water intake drives feed intake, which drives gain and production. So don't forget about the water. All right, let's shift gears and talk about some of the specifics of formulation. Let's start with sows here. We want to have world-class sows and world-class pigs. Down the lower right is a picture from a 1919 animal science textbook, and it called these fine examples of sows. I think we'd be hard pressed to find a sow that looks like that. If you've got one, send me a picture of it. I'd love to see it. We're going to talk about phases of feeding in sow nutrition. And first, it really starts with gilt development. It's often a neglected phase. A lot of times those gilts are just fed through the finisher and moved right into production. Early is great. In the grower, we're putting down bone structure, we're putting muscle on those. But about halfway through that finishing period, we really need to be thinking about more of a sow type nutrition program. We're building strong bodies, especially early, but we're building bodies for reproduction. And be sure to prevent overconditioning. If we need to limit feed or add some fiber in those diets, overconditioning leads to a lot of problems with breeding, farrowing, and lifetime productivity. Gestation. The big factor here is that this is the limit-fed animal. So we have to be sure that every bite they get is formulated correctly. And if we're feeding 4 pounds, 5 pounds, 6 pounds, I mean, even that is a huge difference in the percentage of amount of feed they're getting. So we need to formulate to the amount of feed that they're going to be fed. And it's really a balance. It's a balance of body condition and fetal development. We don't want those animals to get underconditioned. We don't want them to get fat, certainly not fat, or we'll have a lot of problems. But we also want to have good, sound fetal development in those pigs. So gestation is an important phase. Transition is a phase that's being talked about a lot. And I think it's a very important phase. It would be from late gestation through farrowing. And if we think about that newborn pig, probably 90% of that body weight of that newborn pig is deposited in the last 3 weeks of gestation. So that transition phase is very important in how we take care of those sows. Then we move them into the farrowing crates, and this is our time for constipation management. If we have constipated sows, we're going to have more farrowing problems, and we certainly can have a higher incidence of prolapsing in those sows. This is the point where we address farrowing assistance. What can we do to help that? And I'll mention something about that in the next slide here. It also helps drive early lactation feed intake. If we overfeed those sows, a few days before farrowing, we can actually decrease the amount of appetite they have, the amount of feed intake they have. So we want to address that in that late gestation phase. 2 technologies I'd really encourage you to consider. One would be a product that's called Transrite Sow Ultra. It's a coated calcium chloride, and what that does is it causes that sow, if you give it for 3 days, little scoop, 3 days pre-farrow, it helps mobilize calcium from bone to muscle, particularly the uterus, for stronger contraction. So we have farrowing ease, we have decreased stillbirths, sows feel better and get up and eat better. The other thing I'd really encourage you to consider is a drying agent. And I list the one that we have here is Seicozor, but there are probably 30, 50 of those out in the market today, but I really like drying agents. So it's a very fine powder. You put some on the mat, The pigs, after they're farrowed, they can crawl over there under the heat lamp. They get it on their bodies. It dries them off. It warms them up. You want to get one that has some antimicrobial characteristics to cut down on umbilical infections and umbilical hernias. If you're attending farrowings, have a nice warm bucket of that powder there and just dip them in it like a piece of fried chicken. But get them coated in that. You'll be amazed at how fast they warm up, dry off, and they're up getting colostrum. All right, lactation. The key in lactation is feed intake. We've got a dry feed intake. I list water here. This is a very important number. Water at 4 to 1. So a sow drinks 4 times as much water as she eats. So if you're targeting a 12-pound feed intake in lactation, 12 times 4, it's 48 pounds of water. That's 6 gallons of water a day. So we talked about water quality, particularly availability. Water consumption is very, very important. Also with feed intake and lactation, we want to step them up as fast as we can after farrowing. The newer genetics that we've had for a few years now can take that for the most part, just offer the feed to them and away they go. I list gilts in summer here because that's a time when we have decreased feed intake, either in gilts or in hot weather. A lot of my producers have a separate summer diet, and we use that same diet for gilts as well. It's just a more nutrient dense diet, more energy, more amino acids. We may feed it from say May through September, something like that. We don't wait until it's going to get hot. We just say May through September, there's chances that it's going to be hot and decrease intake. It works really well in lactation. And then finally, wean to breed, or what some people call a flush phase. I use ad lib intake of gestation feed in that wean to breed period. I have some producers that I put in a separate bin, and we're now making a new diet, a wean to breed diet, which is somewhere between a gestation and a lactation diet. The real key here, though, is to get more carbs into it. And we do that with higher corn in the diet. They don't need as much protein as they had in lactation, and they sure don't need as much energy as they had in lactation. So that would be another phase, transition phase, wean to breed phase, are 2 phases that we've really looked at the last few years to try to improve production. Okay, let's head down to the nursery pig. We're going to wean those pigs. We're probably not going to just shovel shelled corn or ear corn, out of the back of a wagon to the whole litter and let them grow and round them up later like they did in 1919. We're going to start those pigs right. We're going to start them fast because we know if we start them right, they're going to finish better and there'll be more of them to finish. I have one slide on starter pigs. I think it really summarizes everything we need to think about with keeping those pigs on the mountaintop through the nursery. Use research tested technologies. We put about 44,000 pigs through our 3 research barns last year. Almost all of that went to looking at nursery pig ingredients and nutrients and management. So use research tested technologies. Take advantage of water treatments. There are a lot of really good water treatments out there. Maybe it's electrolytes, maybe it's enzymes, maybe it's antibiotics, maybe it's acidifiers. The great thing about the water products is you can dose them appropriately for what the pigs need. Also, if a pig is not feeling like eating, maybe just right after weaning, or if they're feeling a little bit sick, they're going to keep drinking, and we can really help those pigs get through some stressful times with water treatments. Follow the feed budget. Every research trial we've done where we've tried to cheat the feed budget, it does not work. We've done our research on what needs to be fed to those pigs, how much needs to be fed to those pigs. Follow the feed budget. You'll be glad you did. Remember, intake drives gain. We talked about water helping drive feed intake. Good quality feed, palatable feed will help drive intake, which will drive our gain. Take care of the lights and the fallbacks. It bothers me when I go into a nursery pigs have been weaned 3 or 4 weeks. I see that fallback sick pen, if we want to call it that, that's only half full. At the very beginning, if you're bringing out, let's say 5% of the pigs you're pulling into those pens at the beginning as fallbacks, look at bringing back maybe 10%. You'll be amazed at how much better those second 5% do by bringing them out from the general population into some smaller pig groups. Avoid the cliff edge. To me, that means moving to too simple of a diet too soon. We design our program, and most programs are designed to move to a simpler diet at about 25 pounds of body weight. If we cheat that and start trying to move those pigs at 22 pounds or 20 pounds, it's like kicking them off this cliff edge. They just do not do as well, do not recover. Some of that comes back to following the feed budget. Keep the lysine higher in the later phases of the nursery. Our research has shown that a 25-pound pig and a 50-pound pig basically have the same requirement for lysine and other amino acids. So we want to keep that lysine level up higher. They're on a rapid growth phase. They need all the lysine and amino acids they can get in that diet. If we don't, what happens to cull pigs? They're gone. They're out of our system. They either die in the nursery or they just get culled later on, and it's just an anchor on the system that we don't need. We want to decrease the number of cull pigs, keep those pigs together with their group, growing fast and on through the finisher. Okay, we're going to talk about grow finish nutrition for a couple minutes here. Another picture from the 1919 book. The caption on this was, "Grow finish pigs love alfalfa hay." Well, I don't know of anybody that offers alfalfa hay to their pigs like this. We're looking at a computer-based formulation based on our research to meet the specific needs of a pig by phase and by weight as they go through that finisher. The problem, though, we have is look at all of these factors, and this is just a few of the factors that can affect us in grow finish. We talk about grow finish research, or even looking at farm trials. We call it messy, we call it noisy, because so many of these things can affect whatever we're trying to test in that finisher phase. Let's look at this basic law of nutrition for the finishing pig. And if you look in the middle of this flat green line here, that's optimal performance. And that's where we want those pigs to be. We want to meet their requirements for whatever the nutrients are for optimal performance. If we overfeed them a little bit, yeah, we give up a little bit because there's a little bit of inefficiency there, and there's some cost associated with that. But look what happens if we cheat them on the backside and either don't make a diet that's formulated correctly, or we try to use some poor quality ingredients. Huge cost to underfeed. One of the professors that I had in college, he would always say that underfeeding is twice as expensive as overfeeding. And this would probably say at least that much. So we're going to try to target the requirements of those pigs, no more, no less. So how do we do that? Remember the pyramid. Energy is the basis, and then amino acids. Those together are 90% of the cost of the feed for a finishing pig. Also, let's look at the perspective of pounds. In the nursery, we feed those pigs about 60 pounds of feed. In the grow finish, we feed those pigs 600 pounds of feed, so 10 times as much feed. And also, we have a cost toward our energy and our amino acids. So what do we do when we're formulating diets for finishing pigs? What's the amount of energy those pigs need? What's the lysine level? What are the other amino acids now? Because they're ratioed to lysine. We determine the phosphorus level, and then we start looking at the vitamins, the trace minerals, and the feed additives. We know that some genetic lines eat less than other genetic lines. We also know that there can be some summer and winter differences, and we have to take that intake all into account as well. All right, I'm going to end with a couple troubleshooting tips that may help you on a given day. If you think there's a problem, address it promptly. Two things will happen if you don't. One is it could get worse, and the other one is if we wait very long, we may not be able to figure out what was going on. So be prompt to address any concerns. You know the basics. Take care of the basics first. Air, feed, water, and your husbandry skills. I'm not very good at auto mechanics, maybe, or plumbing or some other things, fixing an appliance. but I know some basics, and oftentimes just knowing those basics has helped me tremendously to solve a problem or to move on to the next step of solving that problem. So do the basics first. Get feed samples and feed tags. Get that feed sample, throw it in the freezer, throw it in the fridge, get a feed tag. It's really difficult when you tell me 3 months later you had a problem. The feed's all been fed and all the feed bags are gone. We don't have any tags. On our feed tags, we have date codes and lot numbers. We can track back if we need to our manufacturing. So get those samples and feed tags, hold on to them. If we need them, you'll have them available. And then work with your veterinarian and your nutritionist, and work with us back to that promptly. Call me right away, and your veterinarian. Don't wait until it's all done and passed and you wonder what happened. Call us right away so we can be involved from the very beginning. I appreciate the time and be able to be with you today. I am Stuart Galloway. There is my email. There's also my phone. If you have any questions after this, please contact me. I'd be glad to visit with you about it. So, Jennifer, I turn it back to you.